Hello and welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I'm talking about my favorite themes in Las Vegas on the Strip, and it's appropriate I begin with my favorite sign at the Paris Las Vegas. If you've seen my other videos on Paris, you know about this sign and how somewhat obsessed I am with it. Now, years ago I created this Las Vegas theme map, and the point of it was to try to think about the significance of the various themes on the Las Vegas Strip. And this particular map featured themes from the past and the present, and for me it was an interesting way of looking at which ones were popular, which ones outlasted the others in terms of the test of time and so forth. So in this video today I'll be taking you through many of these casinos, focusing on some of my favorites and why I think the theming is so impressive at these casinos. Okay, I was just referring to the theme map, and I decided to also put together a timeline. I'm talking about a lot of these casinos in this video, so it might be useful to look at this so you can get a sense of when some of the theming conditions developed on the Strip and so forth. So as you'll get, I'll talk about the Tropicana and Caesar's Palace. Won't cover Circus, but those are late 50s, early 60s, and really Caesar's stands out as that one big early casino that has had the greatest longevity. Then starting in the late 80s we get the Mirage, and early 90s the Excalibur. So starting some of the theming revolution. 93 we get the MGM Grand, Treasure Island, and Luxor. So certainly those last two have a very key focus on theming. The MGM Grand, if you remember early on, actually had more of the Wizard of Oz stuff when it first opened, so that has gone away. 96 we get Stratosphere and Monte Carlo. Keep in mind, as we get to the future in 2018 or so, we'll see the Park MGM becoming what used to be the Monte Carlo. Then in the late 90s, this is the real theming boom. 97 New York, 98 Bellagio, 99 Mandalay Bay, Venetian 99, Paris also the same year, and the Aladdin re-theme in 2000. So that, you could say, I guess, is the big boom in terms of theme casinos, what happened in the late 90s. Then as we get into the 2000s, you'll note every single one of these doesn't have an explicit theme. So the Palms in 2001, the Wynn and Palazzo in 2007, 2006, Planet Hollywood has a theme, of course, not as explicit as previous ones. CityCenter, which was the big development in 2009, has a more abstract contemporary feel to it, as does the Cosmopolitan in 2010. And then we get the Quad in 2012, eventually becoming the Linq in 2014, along with the Cromwell and the SLS. And all of those last ones, of course, have a very modern design aesthetic and do not focus on any kind of place-based themed, such as the Paris, New York, or a more mythical one like Mandalay Bay, Aladdin, Treasure Island, Luxor. As we look to the future, we'll wait to see what happens with Park MGM in 2018, and then Resorts World, which is purported to be a themed casino that may open in 2020. Okay, and if we're beginning a focus on theming, I think I have to certainly mention the Bellagio. The Bellagio is a casino that has withstood the test of time. I think it's, given the fact that it's almost 20 years old, it opened in 1998, it was part of that late 90s revolution in Las Vegas. We started to see the movement away from some of the casinos that had a very over-the-top, almost more archetypal approach to theming, like the Luxor, the Mirage, Excalibur, of course. With the Bellagio, you see seriousness. As you see some of these shots here of the outside, people walking across the street, as I am, it really is about opulence. And I think what Steve Wynn did when he was involved in the Bellagio was to really establish it as something out of the ordinary. Certainly the water show with the lights establishes that. It creates such an iconic image, a performance in front of the Bellagio. If you know, the Bellagio originally was going to be actually on an actual lake, a floating lake, and that was scrapped for practicality's sake, for budget's sake. Still a very expensive casino when it opened. I always feature some images in these videos of the Bellagio, of the conservatory, and the reason for that is I think it's one of the greatest examples of an approach to interior theming. It changes over time, it's aesthetic, and I've mentioned this in many of my videos. You never see someone inside the space who's standing around. Everyone's taking a photo, everyone's taking a selfie, they've got their GoPros, they have their cell phones, they're uploading images, and that is like instant recognizability. It creates awareness on the internet and on social media. So it's really, I think, the Bellagio, one of the best casinos out there. It takes the theming seriously. It doesn't go for the over-the-top. It goes for opulence. It goes for a very classy aesthetic that I think appeals to people who enjoy that sort of aesthetic. Now next we look at Caesar's Palace, and Caesar's is a very curious casino. Let's think about this, and let's look at some of these historic images. Opened up J. Sarno, 1966. This is quite amazing. You think about the longevity of Caesar's. It's truly one of the originals, and in just a second I'll show you a postcard from 1970, but these are early images of Caesar's in the 1960s. Pretty amazing. And look at this image. This is 1970, this postcard. It's astonishing. I mean, look at what Caesar's looks like. Look at the surrounding area of the Strip. I mean, you really get a sense of how crazy the development and the growth has been in the late 80s, 90s, and of course in the 2000s. Looks totally nothing like this today. Here it is today. I have some, I think, GoPro footage here. It's a little shaky, actually. This is my, this would be my iPhone footage. And I did, throughout this video, you'll find some clips I'm doing voiceovers, because when I was doing the recording, I was on the street, I didn't have a lavalier mic, and as a result I had some very bad audio. Just look on the right there. We will be going around the Linq as well, so it's a good place marker to think about. And the Linq is not an explicitly themed casino, and we'll talk about in this video, I think, from time to time, this idea that Vegas is moving away from the types of themes that we see at Caesars, that we see at New York, at Paris, at the Excalibur, at the Bellagio. And I will question that today. I will raise some issues with you, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to consider this. Basically to say, what do you think about the movement away from this era of theming? If we're moving more towards the abstraction, albeit the opulence of, say, CityCenter, you see this with the SLS, you're going to see this with the Park MGM, which is replacing the Monte Carlo. In this era, we're losing some of this. And what I love about Caesars right now is that they're maintaining what they've created in the past. 1966, just think about that. What you're going to see starting here with this video screen, and contrast that with the statuary and so forth, and you'll see this inside the mall, is an ability, I believe, to update and maintain its relevance over time through its theme. Taking its theme, embellishing it, altering it, but keeping it all the while authentic, keeping what they had in the past. As I get close to this video screen, it must be my frame rate. I don't know what I was capturing at on the iPhone, and I apologize for the jitteriness of it. But I was mentioning in my on-site video that again, the audio was kind of bad, that this is absolutely marvelous. And you're losing, I think, some of the effect because of the flickering from the frame rate. But what's so cool about this is they have, the columns here, the pillars, and they have at the top, right, that continues, but in a video form. I mean, I just love how they created the shape. I love how they maintained the sense of three-dimensionality, as I'm pointing out at the top right, so the video screens are extending in this three-dimensional sense. It's reminiscent of what I hear is happening in Times Square with a new, is it Coke or Pepsi? If I get it wrong, I'm going to upset whichever brand it is, but it's one of the two soda brands, and basically it's this approach to three-dimensional signage. I think we're going to see more and more of this, right, where you get a three-dimensional effect without having to wear 3D glasses. We're going to go inside the forum shops as well, and the forum shops are very significant because they've been updated over time. They've been really brought up to date with some of the new themes, and that's why I chose Caesars for this video, is to say to you that I think it's been so incredibly effective at maintaining its relevance over the years, not shying away from its theme. And I'll show you some of the iconic booths, I guess you could call them, not booths, statuary and seating areas, that's what I'm trying to say, inside the Forum Shops. Now, here's a pretty neat new directory they have, and I think this one wasn't working. I'll show you a shot of a second of another one at the other end of the Forum Shops. But I love this. It's a very classy approach to the traditional, sign it, or rather, in this case, of the directory. Sorry. So they have, this very classic three-dimensional side of it, and then there's the new, if I pan down here, I can't pan down right after I shot the video, but you'll see there's a video screen there, and that allows you to actually look up your location and so forth. It's a very cool approach to design. These are subtle elements. These aren't a big deal. They're very subtle in a sense. I'm taking a shot of that there, so you get a sense of what I'm talking about and why I think maybe it's so exciting, and an example of what Caesars has done over the years to maintain its significance, to maintain its relevance. Again, it's one of the oldest casinos on the Strip, and it's just keeping up with all the others. So now we're in two sections of the Forum Shops. This is the one that opened in 2004. The older ones where they've done massive remodeling, 1992. And here's a little interesting tidbit, and I was fascinated when I heard about this. If you do a comparison of sales per square foot of mall, and hold that thought before I talk about that, this is so cool, and I take so many videos and still images throughout this video feature because I think this is just absolutely brilliant from a design standpoint, because it maintains the focus on the theme as far as looking at Caesar here, but it also has this like playful side of it. I was panning up there because at one point in my voiceover I'm talking about the depth that they've achieved at this part of the Forum Shops. I think right there you get a sense of it. I will come back to my point about the highest grossing mall in the world, but I think right here, yep, I'm pointing, so right there you're getting that incredible depth effect. I will take you up the escalators past some of the statuary. I just really love what they've done in this newer part of the mall here. It's just absolutely brilliant. I think it rivals what you see at the Venetian. The Venetian is cool. It has this sense of enclosure and ambiance because of the gondola and the canals that are trying to replicate Venice. But this does something much more in terms of creating this expansiveness. It's bigger, it's wider, it's higher, it has more depth perception that goes on, I think, as you're experiencing the space. I'm going to probably focus again here on these really cool features. I just love how they're half statue and half chair. I've actually never seen anything like that, and I don't know how many people come into the Forum Shops and go crazy over those particular features, but I do. So it's kind of my thing, and we all have those things visually that are really striking when we go into a space like this. But let me go back to my earlier point. I was shocked to discover, or surprised, maybe not shocked, that if you do a comparison of square footage by profits, by the goods and services that they sell in the mall, this is the #1 mall in the U.S. It's grosses even more than Rodeo Drive, and they have high-end shops, they have lower-end shops, they have middle-class shops, they have restaurants, and they have so many. So it's really not that surprising. If you think about the level of traffic here, it's maybe not as surprising. For example, at about, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, or maybe 7 years ago, I had heard that the Planet Hollywood, the Starbucks there, was the busiest Starbucks in the United States. And so some of this is maybe not surprising because of the fact of the incredible traffic that you see in Vegas. We're looking at some stock image of the outside statuary, and then we're back inside here. These are kind of out of order, so this is a shot just before we get into the casino. What I've basically done is walk the entire expanse of the two Forum Shop areas, and this is this incredible, just beautiful decor that they've created here right before. Oh, I'm sorry, this is before you go into the second zone of the Forum Shops, and then I think to the right is the casino, if the camera pans around. There it is. There's the casino. So yeah, this is at the tail end of the Forum Shops before you go in the casino, and the casino itself has been expanded and remodeled over the years as well. We're now back looking at some of the amazing statuary. Look at some of these images here, just of how much ambiance I think you get here. There aren't too many malls in the world. I'm thinking a little bit right now of the Gallery Vittorio in Milan, Italy. I've done a video on that mall, one of the first malls in the world, but just in terms of the opulence of the marble and the features. But this is more, right? This has the statuary, it has the modern stuff, shop as the Romans do. That playfulness, as I've talked about in this video, of the old and the new, not just the old in terms of the perceived old of, say, the statuary and the material culture and decor features, but the old in terms of Caesar's history going back to 66. And then new would be, these are some new statues, again, that look old, but they have a newness to the guest. And then those video screens. I also mentioned those really cool Caesar seats slash bus that you see at the bottom here of the escalators, and you also see in the other older section of the Forum Shops. But this just for me is beautiful, just looking at the sites here inside the Forum Shops. I mean, it's just absolutely marvelous, and I think there's nothing necessarily they have to do, right, in terms of altering this space. I mean, the stores change, but you have basically the shell that maintains the theme, that creates the sense of grandeur that really does for the guests. Just look at the statues. Look at those grapes there. As we're going down the escalator here, I have the GoPro. Just look at what you're seeing, right? I mean, it's absolutely spectacular. I think my favorite mall space in Las Vegas. And when you compare it to other malls, again, I mentioned the Venetian. You know, the Venetian is marvelous, has some great ambiance, but it always seems a little more claustrophobic to me, a little more enclosed. And the older Forum Shops, what they've done with some of the new design here at Caesars, I think takes away some of that claustrophobia, but it still seems a little enclosed. Likewise, you go to Planet Hollywood, the Miracle Mile shops, which used to be Desert Passage when the PH was the Aladdin. You also get that sense of just a much smaller space because of the low ceilings. And I think what you have here in the Forum Shops, look at that. I'm showing you some of the features there on the right, that garbage can that has the old Roman look to it. Students or professors of the classics and Roman history and so forth could talk about the accuracy of what we're seeing in terms of material culture. I'm not going to get into that since I'm not an expert on classical civilizations, but you know, being someone who studies themed and immersive spaces, I have to say I'm always amazed when I'm in Caesars. And I've also said this in some other videos in the past. The way they've designed these escalators is just brilliant, right? I mean, it creates this, it adds to the sense of space. Anytime you go up or down one of these escalators, you get a sense of the panorama. As you pan around, if you have a camera or not, just look at everything you see here, right? It allows you to see so many of the shops in the mall. It allows you to get a sense of the scale, the perspective of the theme. It puts you into the atmosphere and the environment. So the escalators here, I would say, are much more than functional, because they really do take you on this journey. If you were in a great museum and you had escalators like this, right, you could look at some of the features, some of the art, some of the decor and material design, and maybe have that ability to take it in and to appreciate it a little bit more, just because of that perspective that you're getting moving through the space itself over time. Okay, now we're back inside the older Forum Shops, and here I am, as I was talking about. I'll have to show you numerous videos of this. I don't know, I'm trying to think, this was in 2017. The last time I had been to Vegas prior to this was maybe 2015, I'm not sure. But this was for me really striking. It was new, I hadn't seen it before, and I just thought, this is pretty cool. I mean, this is something that just takes the theme and plays with it a little bit. I mean, it's not serious, but I think it does the job. It conveys the theme, and there's also this sense of sort of a postmodern appeal of it, right? Because you basically only see the outside of the Caesar bust and also the column, right? So the other hollowed out side is used for functionality, is used for chairs. So I just love that, and I think if you're designing a themed space or trying to revitalize one, to think about some of those kinds of elements. I mean, they're not necessarily expensive, but they go a long way, I believe, in terms of their effectiveness of conveying something about the theme, not taking it too seriously, but also trying to update it and play with it a little bit. So a bit of remaking here at Caesars. We're looking at some of the statuary up top. Again, you can get into in your own studies the accuracy. It's not a big deal for me. I know a lot of critics who study theming from the academic perspective get really hung up on things like accuracy. And it's a bizarre thing, because I've said in so many videos, like if you go to Rome, if you're looking at Parisian theming, if you go to Paris, I mean, Paris itself is a simulation, the city itself. And then, of course, you go to a Parisian casino like in Vegas, it's a further simulation. But people get hung up on issues of accuracy, whereas I think of things like ambiance, I think of things like effect. I think it's not about the accuracy. If it were about the accuracy, what would be the point of recreating it, right? I think people that say that themed spaces are about trying to replicate and recreate for someone what it's like to be in another place. I don't think that's really the primary purpose, either for guests or for designers. For social critics, that becomes a sticking point, but they have a notion of realist representation of the world, like the one-to-oneness. Go back to Borges' work. He has a famous short story talking about a map, and he said, and basically it's the idea of a map that has a one-to-one scale, and so it would be a map that is the same size of the Earth. So he's making the point in that essay that I think if you get caught up in accuracy in terms of representation of anything in the world, you're doomed to fail, right? Now, going back to the theming here, just look at what they've done here with color. This is quite amazing. The contrast of the pink here that you see. We're getting this nice steady shot because I'm going through with the GoPro on my new gimbal, so I think we're getting some really good footage. I love over time how they've updated the ceiling here. Again, not unlike Planet Hollywood's Miracle Mile and the Venetian. Venetian's has I think a little higher ceilings. These are relatively narrow or relatively low in terms of height, but they've done something through the lighting effect, I think, to establish a sense of perspective with the guests that's not unlike, say, what Disney does with Main Street USA with forced perspective, to play with your own perceptions of space and your sense of distance and so forth. This is really cool here too. I noticed a number of people taking photos of the seating area. I don't know the cost of that, but it's, I think, pretty effective and fits in. It's a contrast in moving through the space. You saw that nice dome feature there. We're moving towards the Fountain of Gods. The Atlantis show, which I will say, I know I've been so positive about Caesars. I'm not big on the Atlantis show. Oh, look, there's a dog there on the left. Must be a service dog. Didn't notice that when I was there. See, there's a value of going through these videos with you in real time because I note certain things. This actually ceiling is higher than the previous one, right? So you get a nice sense of perspective here. It's just great to look at this footage. I think what they've done with it, with the lighting, I wouldn't change a thing. You just get this nice reflection on the floor, on the surface there. You see the imperfections in the, I don't know the type of surface there, but you're getting this nice sense of glow from the lights. There's also lighting under, which I just noticed now, under those amazing features I keep talking about, the Caesars and the columns and so forth. We're continuing to look at the stores. And I think you get a sense, earlier I talked about how high grossing the mall is at Caesars. You get a real sense right now of why that's true. And you have some very high-end Michael Kors, one of the top designers in the world, Breitling. I could not afford a Breitling watch. I mean, you really get a sense here, I think, of why they've been so successful. I'm going to, in just a bit here, I do have some on-site audio commentary that did take because I was inside and the ambient noise wasn't so bad. So let's jump to that for just a minute here. Well, if you can hear on the GoPro mic, I would say this is not unlike St. Mark's Square at Venetian in terms of that sense of expanse, central meeting place, restaurants, the fountains, of course, the iconic symbols and iconography above, the ceiling, of course, slash sky. Okay, and I'll take you through just a little more footage. You'll probably note in my video today that I have more footage of casinos that I guess I tend to enjoy, or I enjoy currently in terms of their theming, and maybe that makes sense. In the case of Caesars, they've done a miraculous job, I think, in terms of updating things, again, maintaining that focus. If you saw the sign up top there, shop as the Romans do. You can't see the top of the text, but it's right there. And we're taking a look at some of the effect here coming down the escalator, as you just see this just amazing space in front of us, and then we'll pan again to look at some of the fountains and the statuary, get this shot again, which we saw earlier. Next I'm going to be looking at the Cromwell, which has become, or it's the new casino. It used to be the Barbary Coast, so I'll give you some of my on-site commentary about the Cromwell next. Okay, so we're leaving the Cromwell here back into the Vegas heat. We just had some rain, so it's cooling things down a bit. What was I saying? Oh, the Cromwell. So, you know, the Cromwell used to be the Barbary Coast, and, you know, to me, one of the ubiquitous sights of showgirls on the Strip. So anyway, with the Cromwell, it used to be the Barbary Coast, so it used to have that San Francisco old school theming. Got dated over the years, to say the least, and probably was in need of a revision. Now, it's interesting to me that what they've done in the Cromwell essentially is to not, you know, there's a design sensibility. It's a small casino. Essentially, what they've placed the emphasis on is on the Giada Del Laurentiis restaurant, the Italian restaurant, which I know has gotten incredible reviews, and also the rooftop pool. And, you know, there's been nothing short of revolution in Las Vegas in terms of this focus on the pool nightclubs and what they even call day clubs, and that's become, I think, more prominent, along with the transformation in terms of nightclubs and high-end nightclubs, table service and everything. People are excited. Someone's walking with a snake on the Strip. You see everything, don't you? But with the Cromwell, what I was saying was the design is very muted, so I think it becomes a bit of a problem in terms of just defining for the guests the identity. Okay, and just to give you a sense of what used to be in terms of the Cromwell was the Barbary Coast, so the quasi-San Francisco theme, one of my old images, and then here's a stock time-lapse video I found on videoblocks.com that shows you the old facade of the Barbary Coast, and I think I'll make the point in this video that a lot of the theming on the Strip is changing, certainly from time to time over the years. We got the Excalibur just in front of me, and just in case you wondered, it's 101 today in Vegas, so it's actually kind of cooling down. Yesterday was 105. Now I'm heading over to New York to look at their look at the absence of the 9/11 memorial, so be sure to check that out. But here at the Excalibur, which I'm just walking under, make my way around to the bridge, some shade. It's always appreciated on a day like this. But, you know, the Excalibur is one of those casinos, I think, that is perhaps in a way undergoing some struggle with its identity. I mean, you've got, as you see behind me, the minarets and everything else. You've got, you know, certainly remnants of the old theme, that 90s theme, which we saw at Treasure Island, same era. Somewhat the Luxor, but I would say the Luxor was never as garish as Excalibur. So in some ways, you could say the Excalibur is a relic of theming, and I think one of the things they have to figure out is what do they want to do. They've moved away from the dragons and King Arthur. A lot of the exterior, you know, the Wizard Merlin was replaced with Dick's Last Resort. I think it's still up there looking. Can't quite see it. But so, you know, it's a bit of an identity crisis to think about at the Excalibur in terms of what its theming aesthetic is. And so that's maybe something it can define over the next few years. Okay, so that was some of my on-site commentary about the Excalibur. Here's a little stock footage. One thing I would suggest to you is watch this casino over the years. This, in a sense, is a casino frozen in time. It hasn't changed much. I mean, a few things here and there on the inside, but we'll have to see what happens in the coming years, because I think something exciting could happen with the Excalibur just because it is in this state of limbo, unlike some of the other casinos where we're seeing miraculous and quick change, such as the Monte Carlo being transformed. I'm walking here through Treasure Island, and I thought it'd be an interesting opportunity to say, well, what happens when we go from a space that has a theme? And actually, TI is interesting, right? Because in a sense, TI is moving away from the pirate theme. The Siren Show is now closed. You see Gilly's Barbecue, which does not fit in with the theme at all. Just past it down the way, you can see off the strip is Senior Frogs. And so over the years, TI has moved away from the pirate theming. And instead, I guess they've acknowledged that they need to move on to something else. So I would say TI is another casino to watch over the years to see what will happen, to see what sort of transformations will become of the theme. And you're seeing here, I do apologize for some of it's just my little mini body cam. We're getting like crazy shaking, but it's worth looking at, I think, just to get a sense of the theming. You see the sirens above us. What we're going to do here is we're going to go out on the strip. And I wanted to, as we're going to walk past the facade of the old Siren Show, I wanted to ask you, like, well, what happens when you move from a theme space into a non-theme space? And there is Senior Frogs on the left. Or getting a sense of the Siren Show here on the right. You really do get a sense here, right, of why stabilization matters on a camera. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you actually inside the CVS of all places. And I thought, well, what's a space here on the strip that is, and excuse me, I'm getting a drink of water. This was one of these days of many days in Las Vegas where it was like the low was, during the day 101 or something like this. But you see the Siren Show on the right, and on the left we're going to go to the new CVS. And this has been an interesting phenomenon for me. I've done some actual videos talking about these drugstores, but as you go inside the CVS or go inside the Walgreens, there's so many of these on the strip. They've started to pop up, and they populate now so many spaces of the strip near the Venetian, and there are too many to mention. And of course, there's nothing themed about CVS or Walgreens. There is one CVS down near CityCenter that has sort of had for a while these very large iconic images of like soda and donuts and stuff like that. But essentially, this is an unthemed space. And what I guess I want to say about going through a space like this is that you begin to realize that there's an importance in establishing ambiance for the guest when they're not in a space like this, right? So we jump to, say, the New York, which is the next casino I'm focusing on here in my favorite themes, and you're put inside an atmosphere, and the atmospheres vary with the stories being told, and in a lot of cases, the stories being told to the guests are not explicit, right? So we go to the New York in Vegas. There's a sense of the ambiance of Vegas, and we're seeing the 9/11 memorial, which has changed rather radically. And by the way, a little plug for my video. I've done a couple videos about the 9/11 memorial, so be sure to check that out because I talk about how the theme of the New York has changed over time. This entire front area has been redesigned. The back of the Statue of Liberty, this area right here used to have all the memorial plaques which were put up after 9/11. This walkway is new. We get a nice view of the Excalibur there. There's the Tropicana on the left, which I'll take you through later and talk about some of the theming changes here. The main facade of the New York has not changed over time, but what's inside has changed radically. The MGM there on the left. I'm panning around here because I wanted to show you like just all the contrast you see in terms of the themes of these 4 or more casino resorts here on the Las Vegas Strip. And the good news is I have my GoPro stabilizer in hand, so we're going to get these really nice shots. And of course the GoPro gives us that 180-degree angle, so we can take in all the marble of the theme here. This is all new, by the way, and this entire area, starting here going all the way down to where the Park MGM is going to be, or what used to be the Monte Carlo is going to become the Park MGM. That has all been designed by really renowned landscape architectural firm. So be sure to check out my 2 videos on Bliss Dance, the amazing sculpture in the park, and also check out my video on the park. And then I have a pretty good video I just did in 2017 called Goodbye Monte Carlo, and it's talking about this transformation into the Park MGM. And I have to say, I'm so excited to see what happens with the Park MGM in terms of theming, because I think it's an opportunity. I'm just pointing out to you there some of the new design. This is pretty marvelous how they've opened the space up, transformed the bridge, and really made it a much more pedestrian friendly area. And that is continued as you go through the park. And I'm not going to feature the park in this video since I've done another video on it, but it maintains, I think, some of this really classy outdoor ambiance type of space. So we have to see in the future what will happen at the Park MGM, because from what I've seen from the designs, they plan to take that outdoor ambient plant-based themed into the indoor. So we'll have to see with what they do with Italy, the Mario Batali effort, and some of the other spaces that I've seen only in the conceptual plans online. So that's gonna be really, really exciting, I think. Again, they've maintained the exterior facade. I think a lot of people would say that there's a sense of caricature perhaps going on at New York, New York, and I'll do an interior video with some on-site commentary addressing this critique and challenging it, but I think it works. I mean, there's a sense of scale here that you get, just, you know, the buildings in the back and the buildings in the front. I think they've created a very effective place-based theme, but of course it's not a literalist one. It's not necessarily trying to necessarily be super accurate. Neither is the Venetian, but I would say the Venetian has a little more emphasis on a place-based approach, as does Paris, although Paris over the years is being transformed, and I think that's changing. One of the cool things about this theme, if you think about it, I can, you know, if I'm a designer, I can say, let's put a Shake Shack, and actually Shake Shack started in New York City as a little burger stand, has now grown into one of the great burger places. And if you haven't tried Shake Shack, by the way, a little plug, it's one of my favorite burgers anywhere on the Strip, or anywhere for that matter. But you know, what's kind of cool about it is if you think about what they can do at the New York, just because of its theme, there's so much eclecticism if you're walking, you know, in Manhattan or whatever, that you can basically do anything you want with that theme, right? Because it's just so eclectic to begin with, if you're trying to focus on representing, say, the space itself and what the space itself is in real life, if that's your goal. Hershey's World. And, you know, I was thinking about this is at the MGM, of course, and I was thinking about how, mixed up, we're at New York, MGM across the street. But, you know, I was thinking about how you have sort of resorting to the brand here for your identity. And I guess part of me nostalgically wants to say it would be nice if casinos could maintain reliance on theme, and maybe the thought is that these will not stand the test of time as we look at the Statue of Liberty behind me. And this is an area of radical transformation, as I'll talk about in another video. Just behind me here, we have the removal of the 9/11 memorial, which suggests maybe a movement away from the place-based theming, which you could never really do here, right? With the facade, there'd be no way to do that. But I guess my thought is the reliance on place for your identity and the exterior side of theming, the explicit symbols on the surface, we're losing that. It's almost like the theming is a placeholder for smaller bits of meaning that you can change in and out, almost like, you know, change the pieces like an erector set or something like that, as opposed to relying on the explicitness of your theme. So something to think about here at New York today. All right, so we'll step inside a bit and look at Greenwich Village here at New York, one of my favorite thematic, you know, city walkthroughs in Las Vegas. I think, you know, Paris's version is also pretty nice. Now I want to give you a couple tidbits here that relate to theming. One is there used to be smoking manhole covers inside New York, and this is an image I found of it online. So no longer the case, but was kind of a cool feature. Now here actually is a video of the New York Stock Exchange, and if you're wondering why I'm showing you this, It's for good reason. There was actually a lawsuit related to the theming at the New York, New York. This was in 1999. I believe the decision was made in 2002. Ultimately, the NYSC was not successful in their attempts to sue the New York, New York, as you can see, for the use of the likeness of the facade and also the name of the NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange. So this is a pretty interesting decision. If you study theming, check out this decision. It's one you should certainly know about and understand, I think, if you're a researcher of these areas. And here is an image then of that New York, New York Slot Exchange. As you can see, it clearly did have some elements that drew on the actual facade of the building, and it raises issues about whether or not building facades can actually be copyrighted. I'm not going to get into that legal territory, but it's significant because to think about theming in so many venues like these around the world, you certainly could get into some of these issues. Ultimately, that area that facade was changed, and it's no longer there. And so beyond those tidbits, I can take you through Greenwich Village, show you some of its charm, and in a little bit I'll have some commentary I recorded on site where I try to get into this issue of, I guess what I'm calling caricature. You see you have elements here of, say, Disney-esque design, things you would see perhaps Main Street USA, not done at the level of Disney. I think when you look at Disney's work, their Imagineering work, it's often not something that can be copyrighted, mainly because of the cost involved. There's forced perspective effects. The trees don't look realistic, but I think they're quaint. I think there's a charm to this space, just some of the little touches. There's a bird that you'll see, I think in a little bit if I have that image, but up in the right corner above this faux U.S. mailbox, which is kind of funny. There's a sign on it saying that it's not like a real mailbox, so that's always kind of funny, right? If you have like an approximation, a simulation of something, and indeed it's not the real thing, and so therefore don't try to put mail in it. But I think for me this is always, as you can see right there, display only. And there's also the fire hydrant. There's some of the signage here, some of the street signs, again the forced perspective effect. The only downside is a lot of the buildings you can't enter, but that's certainly the same thing at Main Street USA in terms of Disney theme parks. So for me, a real quaint and exciting approach to ambiance here at the New York, New York. Now let me jump to my on-site commentary that I recorded addressing some of these issues. Okay, just behind me is Pacific Rim Books, and this is not an actual bookstore, but part of the theming here at the New York, New York. And I was going around taking some photos and videos, and I was thinking that a lot of people probably look at the New York, New York and would suggest that the theming maybe is kitsch or is too simplistic, perhaps caricatured. And I mean, in some senses, I could understand that critique, but the other side of me says actually that there's a charm to this, and I think particularly as casinos and theme spaces age, there's a nostalgia effect that maybe we begin to understand. I was thinking about this yesterday at Caesars watching the Atlanta show, which had that kind of same feel to it. And so, possibly there's a way of looking at this in a different sense and saying that just because it looks a particular way that maybe appears more as a caricature, it doesn't mean that it isn't effective in terms of the guests. So it's my reflection today looking here at some of the theming at New York, New York here in Las Vegas.
Near Margaritaville, but I was talking about the retirement community idea. By the way, we're walking through the Linq here, which is one of the newest malls on the Strip. The rain's coming down again, so it's very appreciated. It's definitely going to cool things down. Here's the Gordon Ramsay fish and chips. I've been thinking I really want to try it. Actually, this has a design sensibility to it. Right, pretty cool. Go through the classic, iconic British London telephone booths. Margaritaville. So I was saying that with the Jimmy Buffett aesthetic and even developing this retirement community, one of the cool things about it is very modest theming, but one of the things they've done there is they've taken, you could say, a very specific theme, like a micro-based theme, very specific lifestyle theme brand, and they've used it as part of the theming of the overall casino. And I think it's a cool way of doing it.
Okay, and we can take a break from my live description of Margaritaville, and I'll take you inside here, show you a little bit of video of the Margaritaville casino here at the Flamingo. And there was actually a Jimmy Buffett Margaritaville restaurant and casino in Biloxi, Mississippi for quite a few years. That ended up closing in 2014. And this particular casino expansion here opened in 2011. And I think one of the things you notice here, and I described this a little bit in my on-site commentary, is the use of the Jimmy Buffett Margaritaville theme to really, I think, enhance, to give a sense of micro-theming, to give a little more identity in a way that is fairly economical. As you look at some of the material culture here, you saw a signature 5 o'clock somewhere sign. You see some of the tropical island accoutrements, forms of material culture and design. And as you can see, obviously with slot machines, you can use those and then just basically put the theme on top of the slot machines. You can see they have a pretty extensive gift shop as well. And as you note here with some of the design, it fits in, I think, with what our expectation would be of Jimmy Buffett, Margaritaville, and that tropical island wasting away again kind of approach that so many people have grown to love over the years, this lifestyle association with Jimmy Buffett and Margaritaville.
So in other words, you can brand the property through smaller spaces, still give theming, give the guest an experience of theming, but do it so in a way that maybe you can start to parse out or divvy out or carve out rather sections of your demographic. For example, they do this at the MGM. They have shows like Ka that have appeal across the ages. Copperfield, I would argue an older aesthetic there. There's an In-N-Out now here. I guess people are excited about that. Very cool, old school theming to it, design. So MGM has, in a sense, these different lifestyle demographics. Jabberwockies, right, is going to be a more diverse, non-white, younger population aesthetic, more avant-garde leaning, performative leaning, etc., than say David Copperfield, which seems a little tired as part of your identity. So something to think about. Having Gordon Ramsay's fish and chips here at the Linq, and he was talking earlier about theming and having a casino branded through celebrity chef. It's certainly good to see here that they hit it out of the ballpark in terms of the quality of the fish and chips. I lived in London for a bit, and I've had North Sea and some of the best fish and chips, and I have to say these were absolutely stupendous. The fish and the chips, the tartar sauce, absolutely incredible. Just in a singular sense, one of the best food moments. So if that's not big enough encouragement to come out here and try it out, I don't know what it is. So here at the Linq, Gordon Ramsay's fish and chips. Anyway, what amazing fish and chips. Just absolutely stellar fish and chips. So I'm going to go back over the Caesars to get a little more still photography. But one of the things I just discovered at the Linq was the old Polaroid store. If you know, I did a video on it. They had a Polaroid museum there. They had a pretty immersive store. And it's changed. I just took one photo, but it's pretty much nothing like it used to be. So I'm really sorry to see that wasn't successful, because it was one of the coolest concept stores I've seen. One of the coolest concept stores I've seen in a long time. I was going to say it's a reminder just of how much the Strip is changing and how just absolutely competitive it is to try to keep up with the force of change on the Strip. I mean, it's just kind of maddening when you really think about it.
Okay, and I can show you a bit more footage from the Linq. This casino area and retail area. The massive Ferris wheel, of course, gives a clear sense of identity to this mall. I've done other videos talking about how the Las Vegas Strip has moved more towards these types of outdoor malls. They become very popular. It's the new thing, and who knows if this will last for 5 or 10 years, but it seems popular right now. The pedestrian space, it allows people to get outside of the casinos. It allows for some new opportunities in terms of restaurants and different types of sports bars, and you get into the art side of things if you go to the park out by Monte Carlo and New York, and soon to become, of course, Park MGM. So not a real theme here, as you might say. It has the feel of any pedestrian mall in the United States and Southern California, or anywhere really, but a nice touch certainly for the guests to take in all the sights and sounds and all the services and attractions here at the Linq in Las Vegas.
Okay, so leaving the Tropicana, Tropicana, a classic casino. They've rethemed over the years. They went away from the old, more place-based theming to this, I guess hipper, more minimalistic white aesthetic, as you can see behind me. Other thing, like we saw at the MGM, is defining some of their identity. I mean, actually quite a bit of it. If you look at, you can't see it from this side of the building, but I'll show you on the other sides. Robert Irving.
Well, wouldn't you know it, the wind was just kicking up that day while I was at the Tropicana, so I have to cut out the audio, which was not very good, but I was just commenting on how more and more casinos are theming their spaces through these culinary brands like Robert Irving and other examples that you see throughout the many casinos on the Las Vegas Strip. Now, back in the good old days, actually, the Tropicana was quite different on the interior and the exterior, and this was really interesting. They had this mini museum of sort that focused on the implosions of the various casinos on the Las Vegas Strip, and this I thought was pretty cool and like something you didn't see in other casinos. And so I think it's a sign of the times, right, that things like this have closed, and guests have lost interest perhaps in this. But this to me was quite fascinating, something that was so unique in terms of the history. You don't get a lot of history focused on, say, unless you go to Fremont Street, where you see all the signage and plaques discussing the historical side of Fremont. Now, the Tropicana is pretty remarkable. 1957 is when it opened, so over 60 years now in the making. This is kind of interesting. They have this as recent, an online slot machine game you can play that has the Tropicana theme. I haven't had a chance to look into this, but I found a note of this online. I thought it'd be interesting to include here. One of the things with the Tropicana, and I'll show you some of the video footage and some of my stills, there's been some radical changes over time. The initial offering of the Tropicana was more a Cuban-based theme, and you had this little village, which you can see here. This is no longer the case. Over the years, they've moved more towards a South Beach, Miami theme in terms of the white exterior and so forth, and I think you'll notice that. This is stock footage of what the Tropicana used to look like. I actually thought the old Tropicana was kind of cool, the space here, but it changed. And here's some of my actual still images of what it used to look like at the valet area. This is radically changed. And the Tropicana, I think it was 2006, they talked about doing this $2 billion renovation, and then bankruptcy happened shortly after that. 2010, 2011, major renovation, and you can see what it looks like today. This is from 2017 with the focus on the Robert Irvine, his new pub that's open inside. So yeah, just an interesting time here looking at the changes to the Tropicana in Las Vegas. Okay, so any video on my favorite themes in Las Vegas has to include the Venetian, and I have to say to you that the Venetian for me is my number one in terms of overall most pleasurable theme. Again, in this video, I'm not getting into accuracy. I'm not talking about consumer theories or critical Marxist theories. I'm looking at the pleasurable side of theming, what gives people joy like myself or guests who don't necessarily study or do work in the themed amusement industry. But for me, the Venetian, which if you recall opened in 1999, it's part of that late 90s explosion of themed casinos, the Bellagio just a year before that. The Venetian, I think, executes its theme throughout all of its spaces in just in an incredibly consistent and authentic sense. And if you're a critic, you're saying authentic. What's authentic about a themed casino? Again, you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, maybe suspend your critical acumen or judgments a little bit, because we're talking about here the pleasure of the guest and being in a space that creates a sense of ambiance and a sense of space and time and so forth. Now, I advise you very much to go and actually look at my other videos I've done on the Venetian. And there's a specific one I call Venice Venetian. And it's my experiences going to Venice and Italy and also looking at the Venetian. And again, I'm not trying to compare them in a traditionalist, realist sense to say, here's the approximation of, San Marco Square. Here's the approximation of this particular feature. I'm instead trying to look at both spaces through the idea of ambiance. I think what's exciting about the Venetian is the fact that they've created spaces that do have a sense of connection to Venice itself, but also depart very heavily from the actual place itself. If you go online, I'm trying to think when it was, Sheldon Adelson, who's the famous casino owner, a controversial owner, when he went about creating the Venetian, he did pretty miraculous work in terms of the research. This particular video, I think, was done on Discovery or one of those, types of stations. And the goal of the video, the documentary, was to look at some of that research, taking their team over, looking at how they looked at things in Italy, in Venice, and then how they tried to approximate that or translate that to this particular space. So, if you're studying this, it would be really worth looking at, as well as check out that book that was done, Dreaming of Italy, by a really good late author and photographer who focused on a number of the Italian-based casinos in Las Vegas, and then looking at their actual approximations and their places of origin in terms of Italy, wherever they happen to be, in Venice and other cities. So I recommend that book as well, because it gets more into that dynamic of, if you're studying theming, to what extent can you talk about the approximations or the representations that have taken place. Again, I would say the Venice does try to do it, because so many of its spaces, interior and exterior, do have a real representation in the real space, even though it's not necessarily relevant, because this is a fantasy. It's just like a story that's written in a fictive sense. You don't really always get into the accuracy of it, because if you do, I think you lose sight of some of the joys and desires and affective domains of what happens in a space like this in terms of the guest with his or her pleasure, how they experience the space, and so forth. But for me, it's about ambiance. The Venetian works so well because it creates a real sense of space. It creates this on the interior and the exterior, and for that reason, it will always, I think, remain one of my very favorite themed casinos on the Las Vegas Strip. Okay, well, whenever I go to the Venetian, it seems like I'm taking so much video and still photography, and it's just one of those spaces for me that is just absolutely captivating. And I think one of the reasons for this is they've thought very seriously here at the Venetian and the Palazzo about art and architecture. And this particular screenshot is from the Venetian, so if you Google art and architecture, you'll have this, I think, really good sense of what they're doing here in terms of the play with architecture, material culture, design, and senses of ambiance. I thought it'd just be worthwhile here to take a look at some of the additional spaces here around St. Mark's Square, and I have the GoPro, so we'll just wander around a little bit. We'll take in the sights. I'm not going to do a lot of commentary here, but I thought it might be useful for you to see some of this footage to get a sense of why the theming and the ambiance of it is, for me, so exciting and spectacular here at the Venetian. Okay, and as we note some of the additional architecture here, I wanted to show you these two still shots. This is the site you see before you enter into their recreation of St. Mark's Square. And this is another shot of that as you're coming out of the alcove. And for me, this is very reminiscent. I've said this in my Venetian video of being in the city of Venice. That sense of how you go through these alcoves, these very tight streets, and then you walk into these amazing plazas. And of course, here we have the recreated version of it. You see the sky above, a much smaller endeavor certainly than what you get in Venice. Again, I don't want to get too much into this dynamic of talking about an original and a copy. It's about the ambiance. It's not about capturing everything. It would be impossible, of course, to capture everything, but you see that the many sites that they have here, the Bridge of Sighs, the Rialto Bridge, all of these make some form of appearance here at the Venetian. And I've said so many times over that the Venetian, I think, has this incredible sense of ambiance, and it's the canals, I think, on the inside that offer a lot of that to the guest. I don't know how many people actually do end up riding the gondolas, but it's a nice opportunity to connect with the guest with some charm. Now, these are some stills from the Palazzo, and these are quite amazing as well. If you look at some of the sculpture here, the artwork, this particular piece here that we're seeing, very incredible vistas here, was opened in 2008. Again, you can go to that art and architecture site to see a little bit more about all the amazing art here at the Palazzo. The Palazzo certainly maintains that sense of ambiance and grandeur that you see at the Venetian. We're looking at the amazing love sculpture here as we're going up the escalator, just to give you another sense of what is going on here in terms of some of the art. More and more casinos, I think, are moving more towards the use of aesthetics. The Venetian Palazzo, you didn't see as much of this in the past. I think with the opening of the Cosmopolitan and CityCenter, additional casinos probably will be moving more towards this sense of art and aesthetics, and you should check out my video on aesthetics on the Strip to get a better sense of what's going on here in terms of the art. But for now, let's move to another casino. Let's check out the MGM Grand. I'll give you some on-site commentary and talk a little bit about some of the changes in terms of the theming and design here at the MGM. You might say that the MGM is not known for its thematic design, but nonetheless it has some really amazing architecture and design elements. So let's take a look. Okay, walking through here, we see some, we've got CBS Television City, Showtime, CW. You can kind of see some of these behind me. So there are certainly remnants of, the media and movie industries that we used to associate with the MGM Grand, but nothing like before. I mean, the era of the Lions, if you remember the live Lion show, even before that, most people probably don't remember the Yellow Brick Road diorama. I'll show you some images of that. So it's undergoing a transformation, and as you go through this district, which has all the restaurants and various attractions, the aesthetic is more modern, is more contemporary, and I would say a more youthful aesthetic overall. So we're seeing some transformations at the MGM that are significant. Okay, and so we're looking a little more here at some of my footage. I did do voiceover, but the sounds of Level Up, which is the interesting adult playground in front of us, were too loud, so I'll just redo the voiceover. So I was trying to show you there some of the classic era of the MGM. The MGM, when we had the Wizard of Oz, when we had the Lions, it was that era of movie making, right? And in a sense, they've moved away from this. It's just a theme, I guess you could say, or a thematic complex that over time didn't maintain its interest with the guest. Now, I'm walking through here Level Up, and this is a really, I think, fascinating new approach to Las Vegas entertainment. So you can see here some of the aesthetics of it, so you can certainly tell by the design of the various aesthetic signature signage and murals and so forth. The TV screens, so certainly maintaining a emphasis on a sports book mentality, which is so popular in Las Vegas. You see the tables here, kind of looks traditional, but you see up in the front there, this is really unique and interesting. You have a more and more movement towards the virtual blackjack and roulette games. You see these throughout the casinos, and I haven't read any of the studies on those, but I can't imagine that there isn't something to the sense that people feel maybe a sense of comfort when they're still playing in a group, but playing in a more virtual video game-like setting. And you see examples there. On the left, you see this giant table, looks like baccarat, blackjack, and appears like there are booths there for announcers. I didn't get a chance to look at what was happening, but this is an entire arena then dedicated to forms of new virtual gaming. You see some traditional games as well. We can look a little more at this area that has the arcade. This is purportedly the world's largest Pac-Man game, so bringing back some of the classic aesthetics of video games here to Las Vegas entertainment, so certainly something quite new and unique.
Okay, just about to leave the MGM, doing this tour on theming, and one of the things that occurred to me that's probably relevant in terms of looking at theming on the Strip is the identity of the casino is certainly not just determined anymore by the theming, the design, the immersiveness, whether the exterior or the interior features. What you notice at MGM is the emphasis on the celebrity chefs, and we see that at so many other casinos on the Strip. So think Tom Colicchio here, think Morimoto here, trying to think of some of the others escaping me right now. Oh, Joël Robuchon, of course, probably one of the top restaurants in the world. The other thing that I think creates the identity of the casino is certainly its shows. So you have a range from Cirque du Soleil with Ka to David Copperfield, kind of an older school aesthetic as well. You have Jabberwockies, which has the younger, more urban hip-hop aesthetic as well. And so those sorts of things, celebrity chefs, the shows, restaurants, any brands that you might have, those I think tend to start defining the identity of the casino, say a little more than the theming itself or the immersive design. And I guess it provides opportunities for more uniqueness. You can change things out rather quickly as opposed to having to rely on your main theme for your identity.
Okay, in just a second, I'll take you through the Planet Hollywood Miracle Mile shops to focus on some of the theming. And in that video, I'm trying to stress the transition from the Aladdin to the Planet Hollywood. If you recall what happened here, and that was some of my construction shots when the Aladdin was being refurbished, the Aladdin stands as, I think, one of the historic properties on the Vegas Strip lasting from '66 through 2007. Beginning in the early 2000s, there was the effort to transition to this new version of the Aladdin, which was much more upscale, bigger, grander, and I think trying to focus on some place-based theming that had been so popular in the late 90s. So it was, capitalizing on that. And these are some of my shots of the exterior, and I'll show you some interior shots as well. The curious thing was that they had a very unfortunate opening, and it was reported that when they were scheduled to open in 2000, one of the building inspections didn't pass, and a lot of people who had planned to stay there, including some of the high rollers, had to end up staying in other hotels on the Strip. So not a very good beginning. I actually stayed at the Aladdin once, and there's just a shot of the hotel room, so you can see nothing spectacular in terms of the interior theming by any means. I think my recollection of the Aladdin was that there was something wrong with the sense of scale. I don't have shots of it, but I recall there were pillars and giant gems in the check-in area in the lobby, and they basically had just, the scale was off. They didn't seem detailed. They seemed more like costumey or folk arty than actual representational or aesthetic in nature. And so that was my recollection of the Aladdin. Now, the other side of me thought that it was an exciting casino, and this is, I think, one of the better shots here. This was above, I think it was called the Rock Bar, which I happened to get a drink at. I remember that. And there was something, I think, of the fantasy level here that was like, say, the Luxor, the Treasure Island, and the Excalibur. And so probably they had this in mind when they were designing the space, and maybe they weren't thinking about the long-term appeal of the space. Now here's a shot, it's a little blurry, but it's a shot I took of the Desert Passage. So the Desert Passage was a pretty big deal as a mall when it opened up. And what I'm going to show you then in a second is my attempt to see what theming legacy of the Aladdin and the Desert Passage remain with the new Planet Hollywood and the new theme in terms of the Miracle Mile shops. So right now we're going through the Miracle Mile shops at Planet Hollywood to see what theming is going on. And but first, okay, so let me take you on a tour of the Miracle Mile shops and offer some of my voiceover now after I've returned home from Vegas, since the audio, and you know this already, tends to be bad when I'm trying to do these videos on site. So here I'm just capturing some shots of the various the citadels and the various design features that are still there as far as the remnants of the Desert Passage. So the Desert Passage opened in 2000, somewhere near $300 million, massive undertaking, and then in 2007 became the Miracle Mile shops as we transitioned from the theming of the Aladdin to the theming of Planet Hollywood. Now, you know, Planet Hollywood has always had this particular brand association. It's changed over the years. And so I think one of the things they tried to do with both the casino and the mall here is to bring about this Los Angeles theme. It's very unspecified, as you'll see throughout my footage here. Another thing you're going to notice is we have a lot of features remaining from the old Aladdin and the Desert Passage. You even see the ship there, the Desert Passage, and I think if I pan here in a second to the right, you'll get a sense of some of that theming that remained from the old, little bit there from the Aladdin, from the Desert Passage. The floor is quite different. The rainstorm here we see is still, you know, a holdover from what we saw with the Aladdin. And if you read some popular blogs online, some people have said that it's a rather curious, and there's where the rain comes down for the rainstorm, and it's a pretty cool effect. I mean, it's subtle, it's not like a big thing, but it works. But look at all the architectural features above, right above the shops, that maintain that theme. So I think this is, you know, a curious situation. And if you were reading Fred Jameson, you know, his works on postmodernism, or Charles Jenks, or others who've written either about postmodern society or postmodern architecture, or both, they would certainly have fun with this, to say what is going on here with this melange of the two themes. It's, you know, something, I guess you want to say that if you wanted to change this up and make it pure Hollywood or LA, you know, you could do some interesting things, right? You could make this more like some of the, you know, venues down, the great shopping venues down in Southern California. You could even probably change the sky there if you wanted, because to me that sky kind of connotes what we used to see with the Aladdin and Desert Passage. And this is the vacation club that I know has changed a couple of times, the ownership. I read, by the way, in 2016, the mall was purchased by another entity, so we'll have to see if any changes come to it. I read somewhere that they considered themselves to be the 10th busiest mall in the United States, and I couldn't confirm that. I saw that in some marketing information, so if you're doing research on the Miracle Mile mall or shops, you might want to look into that to certainly see if there's truth to that. Now look, as we're coming into this section here, I think you might agree that we're getting much more of that Planet Hollywood, LA Hollywood theme, right? We're moving away from everything we saw back there with the old Aladdin theming and the Desert Passage theming. To retrofit all this obviously would be very, very expensive. If you've already spent $300 million, and I know the mall has changed hands a couple times, but if you already spent that kind of investment, right, do you really want to put a lot of money into the retrofitting? And that could, you know, be clearly an issue if you're concerned about investments and so forth. And as you're noting here, we're now into a much more modern section of the mall, and then we're back here to the old theming, as you can see above. So it's an uncanny thing, right? When you see the modern glitz below, you see the sky above, and then the remnants of the Desert Passage and you know, the Aladdin theming. And I have to say, I'm not as critical, maybe as I'm showing you more of the features of the buildings there, as some are in terms of the old Aladdin and the Desert Passage. I actually thought as a mall, Desert Passage was pretty cool. On par with Caesars, the Forum Shops, on par with the Venetian. Larger certainly than when you think about the Venetian or Caesar's Palace, right? At least the Forum Shops as they were before. So much larger in scale than either of those two malls. And so I think one of the questions as we look at some of the classic theming combined with the new theming here in these two eras of Aladdin, Desert Passage, Planet Hollywood, and Miracle Mile shops, the question I think always about theming is to ask yourself, what exactly is the theming conveying? In so many of my videos I've done in general about theming, I've asked this question. I've said, well, what exactly are you trying to convey to the guests? If it's just atmosphere, then I think a guest, in the case of this mall as it stands today, can certainly stand it, right? We can deal with complexity. If you go into any city in the United States or any part of Asia, Europe, and so forth, in a sense you could say there's postmodernism inherent in our urban city spaces, right? We deal with contradictions. We deal with the fact that there are contrasting styles, different brands, juxtaposed within sort of the sense of a montage within a city space. So if that's the case, then I think it's no problem. As we see, I think one of the cooler features up there almost looks like a Liechtenstein sort of style art, and then I'm pointing there where you can see some of the old theming. So let me jump right now back to some on-site commentary talking about the mall in general.
Yeah, so one of the immediate things you notice here, sorry, just checking to make sure the camera's on, that happens. If you compare it to the high-end malls at the Wynn, the Encore, Bellagio, certainly Crystals, the difference is you have more down-to-earth stores here, just as far as the price points. And also you have, you don't have really security guards in front of the stores. And if you notice, one of the curious things, here's the casino coming up behind us. One of the curious things you notice, we're diverging a little bit from theming per se, but one of the things you notice with these high-end stores like at Crystals is not only do you have a guard at the door, the theming, if you will, and I'll show you some video of Crystals, the theming though is, we're not really theming, right? It's more design. And in a sense, you have this vacillation between theming and place-based experiences and brand-based experiences, and then this more abstract design, postmodern design even, which is brought to I would say, a new dimension at Crystals in Las Vegas.
Okay, so here we are looking at Paris, Las Vegas with this spectacular time-lapse stock image video. Now with Paris, we get a sense of place-based theming. They don't necessarily fit in with the theme, do they? You see a lot of this on the Vegas Strip now with more and more street performers, and they're controversial to say the least. Not unrelated to this topic, because when we're talking about creating spaces of ambiance, I think one of the distractions can be some of the performers. You could be outside CityCenter and someone is dressed up as a Star Wars character. In some cases, a Star Wars character that maybe doesn't have the best costuming or something. So it's one of those strange features that I think you also see in Times Square right now that is controversial, to say the least. In any case, going back to the Paris as we see her on the right, I'll take you on the exterior of the casino, I'll take you inside, I'll take you up top, the controversial for me, Budweiser Beer Park in terms of thinking about the theming. I think it's perhaps a movement away from the theme. The Paris opened in 1999, so part of that boom in the late 90s of themed casinos on the Strip. That really was the heyday for all these casinos, and we may never see another version of this. Perhaps with the opening of Sentosa's, sorry, not Sentosa, but Resorts World down the street, that's purported to be a $7 billion Asian-themed casino. That could be the next big move on the Vegas Strip, and that's probably going to happen around, say, 2020. So we're going inside here. This was shot on the iPhone, so I have the smaller scale of the video here. I think I wasn't shooting it in 4K. One of the things for me that's interesting about the Paris is how it's changed over time. Beginning in 2010, they removed some of the Parisian performers. If you went to the casino back in the late 90s through the early 2000s, you probably remember there were more Parisian, performers or greeters. That has gone away, and it's something the Venetian still maintains, certainly with the gondola rides and so forth. You're getting a sense here as we walk inside of some of the theming. A lot of this has been updated over the years. I think the updates in the Paris are really quite remarkable, and I include Paris for its sense of charm as far as theming. And the interesting thing about that is as you walk through this casino space, it's a relatively small casino. I mean, the Paris was never dealing, I think, with a lot of space to begin with. I've never stayed at the Paris, so I can't speak about their rooms. I'll show you the lobby a little bit later, which I think has some pretty nice theming. There's a theater right there. Classy to say the least. I think they've often had one of the best icons here, if you will, in terms of the you're seeing it on the doors as we're going in and out. I think at this point I was trying to find my favorite sign, and I'm sure I'll show you the favorite sign again, but I wasn't able to find it. It's on the other end of the casino. But you see some of the signage there as well. I am going to take you at this point past the lobby, the check-in area. So again, 2010, we started to see a movement away from some of the place-based theming. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the years. I would hate to see them move entirely away from it. And there you get a nice shot of some of that theming in the lobby with the chandeliers and so forth. I think they did a nice job with it. It's very classy. Given the Paris's sense of scale, again, it's not as big as say some of the other casinos. Certainly, the MGM, the Venetian. On the scale of New York, I always think that the New York, and Paris have a much more confined, if not claustrophobic, interior space, and that's what makes, I think, the park MGM interesting, and the park itself just outside of New York, because that's going to open up the exterior of the New York, as well as the Monte Carlo when it becomes the park MGM. I love that seating area there. This cafe they have. There's a upscale version. There's also like the street cafe, like you see in France. The approach there to the chandeliers, right? It's almost like that's. It seems to be more of an interior feature, but it's on the presumed exterior. I know we're walking inside a casino, but this is right an exterior space that is being conveyed here through the theming. And for me, what makes the Paris so effective over these years is that I think it has focused on its theme, but it doesn't do so in maybe as serious of a way as, say, the Venetian does. And I just talked about the Venetian. I'll be talking about the new Asian restaurants here with some additional video, but I think it's really cool what they've done with the theming here, expanding it beyond sort of the, I guess, more white ethnic Parisian focus to more of the multiculturalism. If you've been to Paris, I mean, Paris is an incredibly multicultural city, and I think one of the challenges with theming is that sometimes you focus on only certain cultures, assuming like, oh, we're going to do something based, let's say, on German theming. And we only did, Germanic populations. You say, well, wait a second. If you go to any Germanic cities, some have incredible multiculturalism. Why aren't you focusing on all those populations? Even if they're minority populations and cultures, bring those out. Focus on the subcultures. Focus on the various cultures within the city or the country that you're trying to theme. And that's a challenge for theming, is if you stereotype and only focus on the essences. The essentialism that we talk about in social science refers to the idea that you're only focusing on certain, what you think are the key essences or foundations, and a lot of times that can lead to stereotyping. So that's a challenge, I think, in all forms of theming that we experience, whether it's place-based theming like the Paris, or more less representational theming, say at the Excalibur or the Treasure Island, which don't have specific spaces in mind or places, but have more mythical lands or time periods or areas in mind when they do their theming. Okay, so we'll get the GoPro going. I've got the stabilizer, so you'll get some nice steady footage. You see some of the statuary that they've maintained over the years. I think this one's somewhat old, but don't quote me on that. My recollection is that it's been around for a while. That area between Bally's and Paris, if you remember the old how the old Bally's was, that's changed significantly over the years. In a sense, they've expanded the Paris theming more into the Bally's terrain, I guess you could say. Just getting a sense here of the street signs. It's a rather tight space, right? Just like the casino. Look at the ceiling height there, right? What would you say that is? 20, maybe 30 feet or so. It's again something to consider when you think about theming and creating ambiance. I've always thought that the Parisian streets here, as small as they are effective. There's a charm to them. Some of the places have changed over time. Here's some theming memories for me. Theming's often about memories. On the left, I remember getting some great crepes there. And then I used to always love these apple turnovers right there. I would get, and that bakery maybe has changed a little bit over time. Reminiscent, there was this incredible apple turnover I had when I was taking the Channel, and it was in all places, the train station, going from Paris back to London back in 2004. It's funny with theming, right? A lot of times we base things on memory. If you study Marcel Proust, his work and his great literary tradition, he often talks about how memory is connected to the senses, and I think it is. It's connected to smell, it's connected to taste, and sometimes a very distinctive dish you've had somewhere can bring back memories, and then you could think about how that can be translated. And here's another memory for me. It's the buffet here. I haven't eaten here in years, but it was one of my first buffet experiences in Las Vegas. I would say this goes back into the late 90s or early 2000s. I don't recall entirely, but I remember eating the buffet there. I remember the coffee. I remember some of the salads. I remember some of the seafood and the fish. And so it's something that is remarkable to me when you think about it's a themed simulated space, and yet there are very distinctive memories I have with taste, with smell, with sight, again with the senses. Here's these remarkable spaces I was reminding you of with my on-site commentary. I think this is absolutely incredible what they've done here. My last trip 2 years ago, they just had the dumpling place, the on King Street, and now they have this new one as well, the sushi place. But what they've done with the theming here, I think, is really remarkable. Again, my suggestion to you is that over time, we could see maybe more of this, where they move away from sort of a white Parisian theme to a more multicultural one in terms of some of the cuisines. It's important. It's not just important in terms of, if you're paying homage to a place. Here's that great cafe on the right, which is, I think, really cool. Check out some of the theming there, the decor. And this is great. Look what they did here. They did the exterior space. Very clever. Again, the sense that you're actually outside, even though you're inside. You see the blue skies there as well. So playing off the idea that you're walking outside even though you're on the inside. You see a few of the street signs, which I've maintained over the years, I think are quite effective. The lights, the lamp poles and so forth, the traditional directory sign that you might see in Paris there on the left, the interior trees. There's a lot of charming stuff that they've done in Paris here in Las Vegas. Again, it's not trying to be totally representational. We'll have to see what happens in the coming years in terms of how much maybe they'll move away from the Parisian or French themes. But for me, it's one of my favorite theme casinos on the Strip. Okay, so we're just leaving Paris. And if you've heard my videos last couple of years, I don't know how many couple of years, one of the things about the Paris I've said is that it struggles a little bit, I think, on the interior. I mean, the exterior, when you look up at the Eiffel Tower, scale replica and impressive on the outside, has that exterior theming quality to it that we note with, say, New York, New York. But like the New York, there's a crowdedness as you go on the inside. But I want to show you some of the new things they've done with one of the dumpling bars, and then I had seen that one 2 years ago, and now there's a new sushi place, which is, I think, just remarkable design. So I want to show you that. There's also some new stuff on the inside with the
the classic, I guess you say, French theming, a new restaurant, new coffee bar. So they've done a lot to certainly update, and not unlike Caesars, as I was talking about. I think they've kept up with things. Now, one thing that is curious, and this space has been occupied by so many different restaurants. I think it was one of these like celebrity candy shops a while back, and I don't remember which because they're not memorable, those celebrity candy shops. But we have now the beer park. I think you can see. There it is. Yes, the beer park indeed. So this is the Budweiser beer park, and I'm not sure if we're going to get a chance to check it out. But one of the things that I've wondered about is exactly how does this fit in with the theming. So I think it's one of the things to think about with some of the place-based theme spaces like the Paris is how does something like Budweiser, which I don't think of in terms of France, not to say that we're in France now, but that's the theme. How does that work relative to the rest of the theme? So I think the thing we're going to see over the next few years in Vegas is a struggle, an acclimation of trying to adapt traditional themes to new branded forms, new media properties, restaurants, all the celebrity chef stuff going on in the city, which is, I think, a little over the top and maybe a little overpronounced right now. I mean, it's almost like some of the casinos are only being branded with celebrity chefs. The Caesars properties, of course, have Gordon Ramsay, the world famous chef. Tropicana, the only thing that you see on the exterior is Robert Irvine, the famous chef who has, different food competitions and shows on TV. So it's one of the things that's almost in a sense dominating the casino scene and the theming. Now the other side of going this challenge of trying to maintain the relevance of your theme is what's happening at the Luxor, where they're moving away from the theme with some notable exceptions. So it's something to think about here as we talk about theming and its continued nature being updated for the contemporary times.
Okay, and we'll bring our tour of Paris to a close. I was capturing some video here of Paris from the angle of walking towards the Bellagio, and you can see the amazing water show is going. But I wanted to end the tour of Paris talking a little bit about its latest example, I guess, of something that maybe goes against its theme, and that's the Budweiser beer park. And Paris over the years has had an interesting play on the outside. I think for a while they stressed having the classic Parisian restaurant that overlooked the strip. And for me, I think there is something about if you go to Paris, again, let's avoid realism and trying to compare originals and copies, but when you go to Paris, there is a charm with ambiance of sitting in an outdoor cafe and enjoying the hustle and bustle of pedestrians and traffic going by your space as you're enjoying some fine French food. So it's something to think about, I think, as you consider how this casino has changed over time. Now, one of the things we can remember and maybe pay attention to over the next, say, few years is to what extent we'll see more and more casinos like Paris, Luxor, certainly TI, Mandalay Bay, moving away from their identities in the sense of what originally established their themes in the 90s. And it'll be just curious to see if this indeed continues over the next few years, because I think it suggests a challenge in terms of theming if your identity is wrapped up in a key place or a key time period or a cultural association or certain symbols like the Eiffel Tower, then it isn't necessarily as easy to move away from it as, say, if you take the Monte Carlo and gut it and transform it into the Park MGM. And the Monte Carlo really never had any key architectural features that couldn't be, if you will, dealt with later in terms of a remodel or a remaking. But let's walk up the steps back at Paris, because I just wanted to show you some short video footage of going to the Budweiser beer park. And I think what's interesting about this again is the connotations. You see some of the, as I walk up the stairs with the shaky footage, you see, of course, the French Parisian theming, but then at the same time you're going to see the associations of Budweiser, which in my mind doesn't make me think anything of France or Paris. It's certainly a nice space, to say the least, but you get that contrast when we pan up and look at the Eiffel Tower. So it's a reminder, I think, of some of the challenges and the dynamism of theming here on the Las Vegas Strip at Paris. Okay, I've mentioned it already a couple times in my video, so I thought I should reference the Monte Carlo here a little bit with some stills and also mention the Park MGM. So the Monte Carlo, I'm trying to recall, opened in the, was it 96? Correct me on that. Definitely late 90s. And I actually remember I mentioned in my video, be sure to check out Goodbye Monte Carlo, because I talk more about the theming and the history and how the Monte Carlo struggled over the years, including its fire, that dramatic fire back in, has been 5 or 6 years or so. But I remember when the Monte Carlo opened, and we're seeing the 2017 images, and these are soon going to change. You can see they've moved away from the theming of the Monte Carlo. But I remember when it opened that I thought it lacked some of that ambiance or opulence of, say, what the Bellagio would become later, or perhaps of the Venetian and the Palazzo, what the Wynn became years later. I think the Monte Carlo was playing with the theme, focusing on Monaco, trying to create this sense of high class that ultimately didn't work or didn't connect with the guest. It was, in a sense, maybe a bit disingenuous to think that the guest would accept the level of theming here at the Monte Carlo. I mentioned in my Goodbye Monte Carlo video that they started a campaign that I thought was a rather odd one, where they tried to say, like, it's a less pretentious form of opulence. And it was just, playing with metaphors and contradictions I think didn't work in terms of that campaign. Now here's some of the sights of going inside the space. This used to be that really big mall. If you remember, there was a brewery there that had a nautical theme. There were quite a few stores, and that's all essentially, I guess, going away. They're getting ready here for the park MGM to open up. You see some of the chandeliers here, so it looks like the aesthetic here is going to be that more modern aesthetic, contemporary aesthetic, less place-based representational that you see, say, at the SLS down the street, which I think has gone through its struggles over the years in terms of ownership and marketing. And you also, of course, see that at CityCenter as well. This appears to be one of the eatery spaces, one of the interior exterior spaces that you can see. So it looks like they're going to maintain the theming that we see with the park itself, and I'll show you a couple images of that coming up. And again, I've done a video on the park, which you should also check out. And then next here is the site of the check-in area, and this is radically different. If you look at this, you get a sense of what the aesthetic is going to be. Right now, in August or September of 2017, you could walk through the Monte Carlo, soon to become Park MGM, and you get a sense of, I think, where the theme is headed. It's not place-based, from what we can tell. Again, who knows once it opens. So I mentioned the park itself. So this is the area that connects, a really large area that connects New York to the Monte Carlo, soon to become Park MGM. It's a beautiful space. Again, check out my video on it. You have to walk down and really take in the sights, all the plants, all the signage, all the great lights. At night, it's even more interesting than the daytime. You have the remarkable sculpture, bliss dance as well. So if this is an indication of things to come, I think we're going to maybe see at the Park MGM some sense of the natural, the outdoors being incorporated. We're also going to get that high-class ambiance that you see so heavily at CityCenter. Go inside Aria, go inside Vidara, go inside the Mandarin Oriental, and you get that sense of the high-class decor, the very slick stuff, modern stuff. You also get that, of course, at the Cosmopolitan, which is so successful and trendy and hip and popular with younger people. So one of my questions, I think, to pose to you in this video is, what's going to happen with the place-based, representational, even mythic place-based theming in Las Vegas? You see one of my images here from CityCenter. I love CityCenter. When I go to Vegas, I typically stay somewhere in CityCenter. It's either Vidara or Aria, or I stay just next door at the Cosmopolitan, not part of CityCenter, but right there. And I think for me, there's something miraculous about the architecture here, the design, the decor. It is, very classy. It's very incredible. It's very aesthetic. But you're also losing, I think, something of what was Vegas's past in terms of place-based theming. Now, curiously enough, in 2017, I went to the newest casino on the Strip, and this is the Lucky Dragon. I had heard about it. It's right next to the SLS. You basically just go past. It's smack dab next to Bonanza Gifts. So this was a complex, I believe an apartment complex that got rethemed. This is a shot of the dragon on the interior, and then we'll get a shot of the exterior. And I can't believe I didn't take a shot of the exterior of the building itself. You can just Google it, look online, but it's relatively small. It's kind of curious. I looked at the marketing information online before I went, and it looked a lot bigger. And it's just one of those things, you get there and it's really small. It's classy, certainly. It has a connection, from what I've read. The marketing is to Asian guests and gamblers and so forth, and you can definitely see that. They claim to have very authentic Chinese cuisine that you can eat inside. So what'll be interesting to see in terms of Asian theming is what happens with Resorts World when that opens. If it's truly going to happen, and I don't know if they're saying now by 2020 or 2025 or something like this, but they're purporting that they're going to spend over $7 billion on it. So that'll be the next version of a place-based theme. We'll have to see what happens with it. I think their design that I've read is being changed over time, and so maybe they will opt for more of the subtlety that we're seeing in a lot of the place-based theme casinos on the Vegas Strip. Now, maybe we are now inside the Mandalay Bay. This is one of their restaurant areas, and this facade has actually changed over time as the restaurant has changed over time. The Mandalay, I think, is an interesting casino in terms of looking at theming. I wouldn't say I list the Mandalay as one of my favorite themes, and I think the reason for that is the ambiguity of the theming. It's changed over the years. Now, I should say I've had some very fond memories of visiting the Mandalay. You see their new slogan here. They have "Welcome Resortists," which is kind of interesting. Have to look into that campaign to see what they're intending by it. But one of the things I remember about the Mandalay was just the wave pool, the miraculous experiences you can have in their mini water park. Also the wide open nature of the casino. I have some very fond memories of just some of the smells of this casino. Again, a lot of casinos use distinctive smells to connect to the guests. The theming itself, I think, is delivered more fully. If you go to the Shark Reef and Aquarium, you see the theming really coming into play. It's more reminiscent of that fictive magical theming you see at the mini Atlantis properties, whether in South Africa, Bahamas, or in Dubai. And there they use that fictional theme in some very interesting ways with the aquaria that they have. And they do that here. They do that here, certainly. But throughout the rest of the resort, I feel like the Mandalay doesn't convincingly express exactly what its theme is, and I think it's a little too abstract just for my liking, just a personal taste. Now, can you tell where we're at now? I'm not sure if you can. Give you a second to think about it. We're actually at the Luxor, and you can maybe tell from that unique elevator, actually one of the most unique elevators in the world. I've stayed at the Luxor, I think, twice in my life, and it's an interesting experience, the incline that you go up on. Now, this is the food court, and over time, the Luxor has changed dramatically on the interior. There's an old joke I have about, they can't change the theming on the exterior. They've maintained a few of the key features, but if you walk through the casino over time, you see this de-theming that has happened. And you can check out, I have quite a few de-theming or re-theming videos about the Luxor, and also check out my videos on Egyptomania, where I talk about some of the theming here. I have to say the Luxor is a curious theme for me. It's one of my first themed casino memories in the late 90s on the Las Vegas Strip, and it's a favorite in some senses. I never thought that the Luxor had an upscale, posh aesthetic to it, but it had a draw. There was something about the spaces on the exterior, seeing the light, the dramatic of it, the Sphinx. On the interior, I always felt that this atrium space was really cool, was one of the best actually in Vegas, and maybe still is. It's changed over time because of some of the signage, some of the different restaurants and so forth, but it's a pretty remarkable site. It reminds me really of the design of the Contemporary Resort Hotel at Walt Disney World, which I stayed, I think, when I was a child, many, many years ago, at least visited there. And it has that same sort of dramatic atrium design to it, and it's always reminded me of it. So the Luxor, I would say, has a very curious, and I have a kind of a nostalgic glance when I think about the Luxor and I visited today. This is one of their gift shops that we're looking at. So it never delivered on the theme. Maybe as effectively as it could have. And I kind of actually missed the days when it had the King Tut stuff, when it had I never saw the canals in person, but those old canals they had at the beginning, I think were a miraculous, marvelous idea to really give the guests something different in terms of the check-in experience on these little boats that you would float to from the check-in desk to the room. Well, that's going to wrap up our tour today, focusing on some of my favorite themes on the Las Vegas Strip. It's a rather quixotic look at some of the themes in Vegas. I'm not trying to be accurate or focus on the significance or the accuracy of the themes. I was mainly trying to focus on why some of these themes have been so exciting for me over the years. There's a lot of change happening on the Las Vegas Strip, and I again encourage you to think about the nature of this change. If you study theming, you might think about where we were, where we are now, and where we might be headed with some of the future themes, particularly if we're moving away from place-based representational theming on the Strip. So much to think about in terms of the future of theming here in Las Vegas. So I hope you enjoyed this video focusing on these aspects of theming today, here looking at some of my favorite theme venues in Las Vegas. So please come back for additional video features of the Immersive Worlds Handbook.